What is up, guys? We are back with another video, and today we're checking out an X570 motherboard from ASRock. It is their X570 Taichi. So let's go ahead and take a look. Alright guys, so starting with accessories, you get 2 bags of SATA cables, a Wi-Fi antenna, a small screwdriver, which we'll get into in a little bit, SLI bridge, an ASRock case badge, standoffs and screws for your 3 M.2 slots, a quick installation guide, and a driver and software CD. Now getting into the board itself, the X570 Taichi is definitely the best looking Taichi board that we've seen from ASRock. It has a black PCB with silver and black accents, and those gear designs that the Taichi brand or series is known for are pretty much all over the board. Starting with the CPU socket, we of course have AMD's AM4 socket. Now, ASRock X570 motherboards will support both 2nd and 3rd generation Ryzen processors. The X570 Taichi features a 14-phase power design that makes use of 60 amp power chokes. The power delivery components are covered by 2 large heat sinks, and they are connected by a large heat pipe. At the top corner of the board, you'll find an 8-pin EPS connector, an extra 4-pin power connector, as well as a 4-pin fan header. As we move over to the memory slots, we can see there are 4 DDR4 DIMM slots, and these support DDR4 memory up to 4666 megahertz. The slots are not metal reinforced, but they do have the locks on the bottom, and this is going to make swapping out memory easy if you have a graphics card installed. Right above the memory slots, you'll find your CPU fan and optional CPU fan headers. And then coming over to the edge of the board, you have your 24-pin ATX power connection, a USB 3.2 Gen 1 header, 4-pin fan header, and then an internal USB 3.2 Gen 2 connector. The placement of the Gen 2 connector is a bit odd, as it kind of sits in the middle of the board, and it actually lines up perfectly with the first PCI Express slot, meaning that if you have a graphics card installed, it's going to be really hard to connect anything to this connector. As we move down the board, there are 8 SATA 6GB ports. These are of course controlled by the X570 chipset and offer RAID 0, 1, and 10 modes. At the bottom of the board is where you're going to find the rest of your headers and connections. So from left to right, you have your HD audio headers, Thunderbolt header, TPM header, 3-pin addressable RGB header, 4-pin standard RGB header, another 4-pin fan header, 2 USB 2.0 headers, a postcode display, power and reset buttons, front panel headers, and a clear CMOS button. The bottom half of the board is actually one very large heatsink, and yes, it's a heatsink. It's metal, it is not plastic. The heatsink covers 3 M.2 slots and connects with the chipset heatsink. It's actually one single piece, which means if you want to install even just one M.2 drive, you have to fully remove it. I do like the gear designs that are on the heatsink and the gears that are actually embedded in the chipset heatsink. Before we remove this big old heatsink, let's take a look at our expansion slots. We have 3 PCI Express 4.0 X16 slots and 2 X1 slots. Of course, with a single graphics card installed in the top slot, it's always going to run at X16 speeds, but if you install 2 cards, they're going to run at X8 speeds. All 3 of the X16 slots feature ASRock's steel slot, which provides better stability for heavier graphics cards. Removing the heatsink from the bottom half of the board is actually not all that hard. It's held into place by 3 Torx screws, and ASRock does provide the small screwdriver that you need to remove them. With the heatsink removed, we can see our 3 PCI Express 4.0 M.2 slots. 2 of them support 80mm M.2 drives, while the third supports 110mm drives. Also, with the heatsink removed, we can get a better look at that active cooling fan. Now, most X570 motherboards will have an active cooling fan. That's just because the X570 chipset uses about 3 times as much power as the X470 chipset. When it comes to audio, ASRock is using their Purity Sound 4 solution, which makes use of the latest Realtek ALC 1220 audio codec and a 120 dB SNR DAC. There are individual PCB layers for the left and right audio channels. While most of the audio components are covered, we can spot the audio capacitors. As we come back up to the rear I/O, it has a nice cover on it which says X570 Taichi, and this is actually going to light up with RGB lighting. We also see that we get an integrated I/O shield, which is something that I love to see on motherboards. As far as connections and buttons go on the rear I/O, we have a BIOS flashback button, 2 antenna ports, a combination PS2 port, 2 USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports, a small clear CMOS button, HDMI, gigabit Ethernet, 4 more USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports, 2 USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports, one is a Type A and the other is Type C, and you have your audio connections. Now the Wi-Fi on the board is powered by an Intel 802.11ax adapter, and USB BIOS flashback on this board allows you to flash your BIOS with only a power supply connected to your motherboard, so you don't need your RAM, CPU, or any other components. Flipping the board over, we have a metal backplate that covers most of the board. This not only adds stability, but it's also going to act as a heatsink for those very hot components. When it comes to RGB lighting on this board, this is definitely the most RGB that we've seen from ASRock. You have lighting on the rear I/O cover, across the board's heatsink, and then along the edge of the board. It goes together really well, and the lighting on the edge of the board is going to provide a really nice underglow in your case. All right, guys, so when it's all said and done, I think ASRock has a really great board in their X570 Taichi. It has pretty much everything that you would want in an X570 motherboard, and the Taichi series has always been to bring all of those great features at a pretty good price. And I think this board sits in the middle of pricing when it comes to X570 motherboards. It's $299. Some of the other boards that we've taken a look at are like $269, $279. The only feature that you're missing on this board that those boards have is 2.5 gig LAN. So if that's something you want, you're not going to find it on this board, but you still are getting, 802.11x or Wi-Fi 6. You're still getting those 3 PCI Express 4.0 M.2 slots. You're still getting USB 3.2. You're still getting a very great VRM. I mean, you're getting a lot with this board. And one thing I really like about this board is that ASRock kind of took the plunge with RGB. We've seen RGB be like this big crazy thing. And this is the most RGB I've seen on an ASRock board, but I think they've done it right. It's not overdone. It's not, just like too much RGB. I think it's perfectly done, and it's just the right amount of RGB, and it's gonna look great in any case. And of course you can control that RGB with their software. The only real issue that I had with this board is the placement of that USB 3.2 Gen 2 internal connection. That sits right flush with your first PCI Express slot, which means it's gonna be really difficult to connect that connection if you have a graphics card installed. That's pretty much it. It's a great board at a great value, and I think it's the best looking Taichi board from ASRock that I've ever seen. Now, if you have any questions about this board, go ahead and leave it in the comment section below, and we'll have links below where you can go ahead and check out our full review, which will have all of our benchmarks and everything like that. And we'll also have a link where you can go ahead and pick this board up. Now again, guys, if you did enjoy this video, we would appreciate it if you hit that thumbs up. And if you enjoy our content, go ahead and subscribe. Until next time, catch you guys later.